Hello everybody. Did such a great job on the last video I did about changing the headlight on the 2008 Cadillac SRX all-wheel drive V8 that I decided we'd go ahead and do a video on how to swap out the rear brake rotors and pads on the same car. Once again, this will apply to multiple model years of the Cadillac SRX, and check out the comments and the information below this video to find out more. Sorry, I don't have my standard coffee in heaven coffee cup. Today it's so hot out, I decided a little nice cold white wine would come in handy. Anyway, one thing I found out about this Cadillac SRX after driving it for about 30,000-40,000 miles is the rear brake rotors with the original equipment rotors tend to quote unquote warp easily. So I decided to upgrade to some better rear rotors, as you will see in the upcoming video. I'll try to put some notes at the end on what tools to use and various other tips and information, and hopefully you'll save yourself about 150 bucks by doing this. Also note that changing the front rotors is very similar procedure and process to changing the rear rotors, with the exception of the possibility of slightly different tool set. But you'll get the idea based on the rear rotors on how to do the front rotors if that's what you're up to. They're basically both, on this particular range of model years, they're both single piston calipers, and removing the rotors and or the calipers and or the pistons is all about the same. You might want to leave the rotors themselves in the plastic wrap if they happen to come wrapped while you're banging them around. Try not to ding them or anything, laying them on a rough surface or anything like that. You'll also notice that the proper replacement rotors will have a countersunk hole where a torque screw will be installed later on. If it doesn't have that, don't even bother starting your project, because you're going to need that countersunk hole. In this case, we're using slotted and drilled rear rotors because there's a tendency for the rear rotors to warp or malform quite often, which is why I'm doing this project today. I'm also going to use some carbon fiber preheated brake pads, as you can see on the box here. They've been pre-treated, so they should break in a little faster. I may talk about how to properly break them in later on at the end of the video for those who want to know the extra tips and information. Most of these videos I try to keep them short, so for the people with short attention spans. But anyway, carbon fiber pads, good idea, and make sure your rotor has the countersunk screw hole, so it's the proper 6-hole rotor with the extra countersunk torque screw hole. First step for this whole process, obviously, is getting the tires off so you can operate. Loosen the lug nuts before lifting the car and tire off the ground. You'll notice I've put a jack stand underneath one of the frame members here, and I've only lifted it barely far enough for the tire to be off the ground. The tire looks like it's on the ground, but it's just a 1/4 inch maybe off the ground. I'm keeping the jack under the same frame member, but I'm not going to rely on that for safety. I've got both of them under there for safety reasons, all right? Here I've removed the tire, and you'll notice the Torx screw I was telling you about. In order to remove this Torx screw, you're going to need a number T27. T for torque 27, bit. General Motors decided to engineer this to make it difficult for the average person to do it yourself unless they run to the hardware store and get the right bit. They would rather you take it in and pay a couple $100s to have a mechanic do it at a GM dealership, or even maybe as much as $100, $125 at a discount automotive service department. So I guess that also will make sure that the rotor is aligned properly. And that brings up another good point. When you buy the rotors, make sure the guy that sells them to you, or the source that sells them to you, sells you a set of balanced rotors. It's not only a good idea to get a heavier duty metal rotor, but ask him to make sure it's a balanced rotor. That way, if your wheel and tire are balanced and your rotor ends up balanced when you get done, you shouldn't have any problems with out of balance conditions. Okay, another little trick of the trade here. Since you may not really know your torque specifications for when you put this back together, you might want to note the approximate position of your wrench before you start loosening the bolts. That way, when you go to tighten things back down, you can tighten to the same angle of rotation and maybe a smidge more, and you should be dang close to your torque spec that was originally used at the factory, or the last time around anyway, for putting this back together. If it was done at the shop last time, it's hard telling if a mechanic had his act together and actually torqued things, or if he just ranked on it as hard as he could. But in either case, it wouldn't hurt to take some notes as you're going along like this, so that at least you're in the ballpark when you get all done. I mean, you can do the best you can do. But anyway, you'll notice that before I'm loosening the lower bolt for the actual caliper mounting frame, that I am noting the angle here is about 20 degrees to the right on that bolt. So same thing on the other bolts. After getting the lower bracket bolt loose, I've learned the hard way that it's hiding kind of behind a strut brace and a shock absorber. Naturally, the GM engineers couldn't figure out a way to put it in a place where it was easy to access. So what I suggest is, once you break it loose, you set yourself up with a longer reach 15mm socket with an elbow and a small extension and probably a 3/8 inch ratchet. That seems to be the easiest way to get back in there from behind the shock absorber, reach the bolt at the proper angle, and be able to loosen it. You'll notice that the two caliper bolts are high and low, and they're a lot easier to remove. So they're probably in the range of 70 to 80 foot-pounds max on the torque. And once you remove them, you got to be careful that you don't do anything that will screw up your brake fluid line here. So you want to be really gentle with these, and hopefully place them on the one of the suspension arms here, so it doesn't dangle down and pull the brake hose loose. So I'm going to try and do that now. Hopefully I won't get any egg on my face as I'm pulling this puppy off. Okay, so here's your piston that'll need to be retracted one way or another. But for now, I'm going to hang this puppy up. I've got it in a safe position there where it won't drop on the ground and rub the line or anything. So here's the remaining parts, the pads and the bracket. I've already loosened up the lower bolt, which is the hard one to reach, but I'm leaving it in hopes that I will be able to rotate this bracket out of the way. Okay, so hopefully the next step of your operation is to gently slide the pads out, and if you are smart, you'll probably save them in case you need them someday. So you'll notice that there's a particular direction and particular side that each pad goes on. Also, if you also notice there's some slider clip, and the kit will probably come with some new ones, so you're going to want to replace them one for one. And if you take those out ahead of time, again, remember which one goes in which position and how it's oriented. Another little tip, as far as these clips go, if I was you, I'd take one clip out at a time and replace it with a similar one from the kit, and that way you'll have an even better result. They're pretty tight in there. You might have to wedge them out with a screwdriver, but I'd go ahead and pop those clips out and put the new ones in first, and then go ahead and rotate the bracket out of the way and put your rotor on. Okay, so there's what a fresh clip looks like installed. And you might also notice that if you're doing this the hard way rather than up on a lift in a nice shop, you might want to leave your tire close enough here so that you can sit on it. Makes for a great little sitting platform. Just another tip to go by. When you take your bolts out, put them in some sort of an order. I'm sticking the bottom bolts over to the left, and I'm going to stick the upper bolts over to the right, and I'm going to put them someplace where I'm not kicking them around or whatever. That way you can put them back into the same holes they came out of, and again with the same thread pitch and torque that you might have had before if you've been taking notes. Okay, with the bracket off, there's something else to note on this particular guy. It's got a little rubber boot here. You can kind of see that as I pop it out. The kit I happen to order has replacement boots, so you got to keep the threaded insert bolt, but the boot can be replaced if you want to go through the trouble of pulling that out. I'll let you figure that part out on your own. Okay, now we're going to pull off this Torx set screw I was telling you about. And hopefully once that's out, this rotor will come off easily. Again, you have to have a number 27 bit. Okay, one more thing to note. I told you earlier, probably, to put your parking brake on. Now that we're in the air, I blocked the front tires, which I'm not going to bother showing you, but the parking brake makes it impossible to remove if it's a good parking brake. So you got to release the parking brake to get this puppy off. So anyway, that's the main thing. You got to get the Torx screw out, you got to release the parking brake, then you can go ahead and put it back on until you're ready to work on the other side. By the way, one more thing you might want to think about, since you're working with probably rubber gloves or mechanics gloves on, when you handle the new rotor, put on a fresh pair of gloves so you're not getting grease or anything else you might have got on your gloves transferred over to this rotor. And you know, make sure again that you put the new pads on the right positions, etc. But cleanliness is next to godliness, and it'll probably bed in a lot better if they're clean to begin with. A couple more things to note. I brought the rotor out of the bag, and immediately it dawns on me, and it should dawn on everybody else, if you've got slotted or drilled rotors, they're directional, and you need to make sure you place the proper rotor on the proper side. Luckily, again, this kit that I bought is a really good kit. Check the end of the video for part numbers, etc. And they've thought of everything by putting a little label on it for you, just in case you don't know which way is which. And you'll also notice that when you mount it, you got to line up the set screw hole with the screw hole on the hub. So over and out on that part, we'll go into the next step here. I'll basically, it's just reverse everything from this point forward until you've got it all back together. So hopefully that'll give you enough information to get by. And since I'm doing this out on a sunny day and getting sunburned, I think I'm going to cut it off at this point. I think I've told you just about everything you need to know. Okay, one more thing to note. If you have a C-clamp or some sort of a wood clamp or whatever, you can press that piston back into the caliper far enough so that you can put it back on and clear your width of your pads on here and everything. So unfortunately I didn't bring my C-clamp, so I'm going to use a different technique, but a C-clamp will help you quite a bit in putting that piston back into the caliper with all the back pressure of the fluid in the system. Here's a collection of possible tools you might need. On the right, we've got the 18mm socket wrench or socket and an 18mm hand wrench. Next to that is the 13mm wrench with a 13mm socket. A couple of adapters might come in handy. Up at the top there, I've got the proper torque wrench to retorque the lug nuts at about 100 psi. 3/4 inch socket on the torque wrench. Got a breaker bar, 1/2 inch breaker bar, 1/2 inch socket wrench, 3/4 inch socket wrench, a 1/4 inch screwdriver bit, and a screwdriver, and a C-clamp, and don't forget your T27 Torx bit, which you may need to use the adapters there to neck up or neck down to get your torque screw out, that set screw that's on the rotor.